Tonight, a group of quarry workers encountered a strange figure beside a mysterious craft. A young man appeared in a German city with no known past, and a mortician claimed he uncovered a secret hidden within one of the most famous UFO cases in history. Welcome to Strange Encounters. It was Thursday, September 30th, 1954, around 4:30 in the afternoon. At a sand and gravel quarry near the villages of Nouâtre and Marcilly-sur-Vienne, 7 quarry workers were going about an ordinary day of hard labor. Mechanical shovels and hoists rumbled across the site as they loaded sand and gravel beside the departmental road on the left bank of the Vienne River. Overlooking the valley nearby stood Camp du Rouchard, a French military training area. Later, some UFO researchers would wonder whether that was significant, but no evidence has ever linked the strange events of that afternoon to the military camp. The foreman was Georges Gatet, a respected man who had served with the French resistance during the Second World War and had been wounded in Luxembourg. He supervised the crew for a construction company based in Nouâtre. None of the men had any reputation for chasing strange stories or making sensational claims. They were simply quarry workers expecting another routine afternoon. Without warning, Gatet was overcome by a strange wave of drowsiness and heaviness. It wasn't ordinary tiredness. It was as if a heavy drowsiness had settled over him, drawing him away from his work almost against his own will. He walked up the slope toward the edge of the excavation and stopped. About 10 to 15 meters away, or roughly 30 to 50 feet, stood a small figure. Behind it hovered a large, shining dome suspended roughly a meter above the ground. The object appeared circular, about 4.5 meters or 15 feet across. Mounted on top were blades or vanes that slowly rotated like helicopter rotors. Yet, despite their movement, there was no engine noise, no rush of air, and no sign of the downdraft a helicopter would create. The figure itself stood roughly 1.5 meters or about 5 feet tall. It wore a close-fitting gray one-piece suit with short boots. Its head was completely enclosed inside an opaque helmet with a broad visor extending down toward its chest. No face could be seen through the visor. What appeared to be a powerful light source mounted on its chest projected an intense beam directly toward Gatet. In one hand, the figure held a long object resembling either a metal rod or a revolver pointed forward. Gatet's first instinct was to turn and run back toward the site office to grab paper and pencil so he could sketch what he was seeing. But when he tried to move, he couldn't. He later said his legs simply refused to obey him. He felt rooted to the spot, terrified by what stood before him. He became convinced that the brilliant beam from the figure was somehow holding him in place. Meanwhile, the other quarry workers were experiencing something equally strange. Several later described being overcome by the same unexplained drowsiness. They found themselves unable to react or move normally as they watched the bizarre scene unfold. The quarry machinery continued roaring around them, but for somewhere between 30 and 90 seconds, the men remained transfixed. Then something happened that none of them could explain. Without turning, walking away, or climbing back into the craft, the figure simply disappeared from sight. One moment it was standing there, the next it was gone. Gatet later insisted he had never looked away. Almost immediately, the dome emitted a loud whistling sound that rose above the constant roar of the quarry machinery. It began climbing into the sky. not in one smooth motion, but in a series of sharp, jerky upward movements, almost as though it were ascending invisible steps. Several French UFO cases reported during the remarkable autumn of 1954 would describe similarly unusual movements. When the object reached an estimated altitude of around 200 meters, witnesses said it released a thick bluish mist or vapor that completely enveloped it. Within moments, both the mist and the object had vanished from view, leaving behind nothing but an empty sky. The strange paralysis lifted almost immediately. Gaté hurried back toward the others and asked if they had seen what he had just witnessed. One of the workers, André Buros, answered without hesitation, "Yes, a flying saucer." Another worker, Georges Lubanowitz, replied that he had seen a man dressed like a diver standing in front of it. René Rouget, André Sechat, Maurice Dubroca, and another worker named Villeneuve all confirmed seeing essentially the same thing. Just then, a truck driver named Amirault arrived at the quarry. Although he had missed most of the encounter, he caught sight of the gray object climbing away into the sky. More importantly, he found the quarry workers visibly shaken and immediately realized something extraordinary had happened. The witness later pointed investigators toward the area where the object had hovered. They reported seeing flattened grass, but no burns, footprints, or other obvious traces. That evening, the men quietly discussed what had happened while eating dinner at the small restaurant where they were staying. They understood how unbelievable their story sounded. Gaté later admitted that if he had been alone, he probably never would have reported the encounter for fear of becoming the laughingstock of France. But with so many independent witnesses describing the same remarkable scene, they felt they had little choice but to come forward. The story spread quickly. François published an account on October 3, 1954, followed the next day by an article in the newspaper roughly translated to the New Republic of West Central, which included a sketch Gaté drew from memory. The drawing was surprisingly simple, showing the smooth dome, the rotating vanes above it, and the small helmeted figure standing in front. The other witnesses agreed that Gaté's sketch accurately represented what they had seen. Investigators interviewed the men at length. Contemporary reports generally describe them as sincere, steady workers whose testimonies closely matched one another despite being questioned individually. As news of the encounter spread across France, however, skepticism quickly followed. Some local critics suggested the entire affair had been nothing more than a practical joke invented after drinks at a cafe and unintentionally amplified by newspaper coverage. Others dismissed it outright without offering an alternative explanation for why multiple witnesses had independently reported nearly identical details. No evidence was ever produced demonstrating that the quarry workers had staged a hoax, and the witnesses consistently maintained their account despite the ridicule that followed. Over time, many of them simply stopped discussing it publicly. Gaté later reported suffering unusual aftereffects for nearly a week. He experienced severe headaches, insomnia, a loss of appetite, lingering fatigue, and the same strange feeling of torpor that had come over him in moments before the encounter. The other witnesses were clearly shaken as well, although they did not report the same lingering physical symptoms. Those details would later catch the attention of UFO researchers because reports of physiological aftereffects would become a recurring feature in a number of later close encounter cases. The Nouâtre incident occurred during what many researchers consider the most remarkable UFO wave France has ever experienced. Throughout late September, and October of 1954, hundreds of unusual sightings were reported across the country. Some days produced dozens of reports from entirely different regions. Many described low-flying objects, landed craft, helmeted figures, small humanoids, and unusual effects on witnesses, including feelings of paralysis or overwhelming drowsiness. Whether those similarities point toward a genuine phenomenon, widespread social influence, or something else entirely remains a matter of debate. The Nouâtre case fits squarely within that extraordinary period. Jacques Vallée included it as Case 165 in Passport to Magonia, highlighting several aspects that made it particularly unusual. 7 quarry workers witnessed the same event in broad daylight. Their descriptions remained remarkably consistent. The mysterious figure appeared to vanish without returning to the craft. The object departed in an unusual step-like ascent before disappearing inside a cloud of bluish vapor. Even the small patch of flattened grass and Gattei's reported physical aftereffects became part of the historical record. The case has also appeared in later works by French UFO researchers and remains one of the better documented close encounter reports from the 1954 wave. At the same time, skeptics continue to argue that the event may have resulted from misperception, exaggeration, or even deliberate fabrication. More than 70 years later, no explanation has gained universal acceptance. There is no physical evidence capable of proving exactly what happened that afternoon, but there is equally no evidence demonstrating that the witnesses deliberately invented their story. What remains is a remarkable account from ordinary working men who had little to gain by coming forward and, judging by the ridicule they later endured, quite a bit to lose. Whether they witnessed an extraordinary machine, an encounter that defies conventional explanation, or something far more ordinary seen under unusual circumstances is a question that still has no definitive answer. As always, I'll leave that decision up to you. On the afternoon of May 26, 1828, the people of Nuremberg, Germany, noticed a teenage boy wandering aimlessly through the streets. He appeared to be about 16 years old, but there was something immediately unusual about him. He walked with an awkward, unsteady gait, as though he had rarely walked any great distance before. He spoke only a few words, repeating the same sentence over and over. "I want to be a cavalryman, just like my father." In his possession were 2 letters, one addressed to a local cavalry captain and another that supposedly came from his mother. Together, they claimed the boy's name was Kaspar Hauser, that he had been born in 1812, and that he had spent his life in the care of an anonymous guardian before finally being brought to Nuremberg. The letters seemed to explain who he was, but investigators quickly noticed that both appeared to have been written in almost identical handwriting. Rather than solving the mystery, they only raised more questions. Kaspar himself could offer few answers at first. He seemed bewildered by ordinary sights and sounds, showed little understanding of everyday life, and appeared fascinated by objects most people would barely notice. Doctors who examined him found several unusual characteristics. His feet were exceptionally soft, as though they had seen very little use. He was unusually sensitive to bright sunlight and loud noises, and he preferred a diet consisting almost entirely of bread and water. As the days passed and Kaspar slowly learned to communicate, he began telling an astonishing story. According to him, he had spent nearly his entire childhood locked inside a small dark room. He claimed he had never seen the face of the person who cared for him. Food and water would appear while he slept, usually just bread and water, and sometimes a simple wooden toy. Occasionally, he said, The water tasted strange. After drinking it, he would fall into a deep sleep. When he awoke, his hair had been cut, his nails trimmed, and his clothes changed. He had no memory of playing with other children, attending school, or even seeing the outside world. Only shortly before arriving in Nuremberg, he said, did a man begin visiting him. The stranger taught him to write his name and to repeat a few simple phrases, including the sentence about wanting to become a cavalryman like his father. He was then led out of his prison, given the 2 letters, and abandoned in the city. Many people believed him. His strange behavior and apparent ignorance of ordinary life seemed difficult to fake, and several respected physicians concluded that he had experienced an unusually isolated upbringing. Others were skeptical from the very beginning. They questioned how someone supposedly raised in complete isolation until the age of 16 could learn language and social skills so quickly once exposed to society. Even today, psychologists point out that children deprived of meaningful human contact for so many years usually suffer permanent developmental problems. Kaspar certainly arrived with limited social skills, but within months he was reading, writing, drawing, and carrying on increasingly sophisticated conversations. His rapid progress remains one of the strongest arguments against his own account. As Kaspar's story spread, newspapers across Europe seized upon the mystery, and before long, an extraordinary theory emerged. Some believed Kaspar was not simply an abandoned child, but the missing heir to the Grand Duchy of Baden. The theory centered on a royal infant born in 1812 who had officially died only weeks after birth. Supporters claimed the prince had actually survived, but had been secretly replaced with another dying child so that a different branch of the royal family could inherit the throne. Kaspar's age matched that of the missing prince, and because no one could identify his true family, many concluded that he must be the long-lost royal heir. It was an exciting theory, but there was never any direct evidence to support it. Then, in 1829, the mystery took an even darker turn. Kaspar was found bleeding from a head wound. He claimed that an unknown man had attacked him and warned that he would not be allowed to leave Nuremberg alive. No attacker was ever identified. Supporters saw the assault as proof that someone wanted to silence him before his true identity could be revealed. Skeptics suggested that the wound may have been self-inflicted in an attempt to keep public attention focused on his story. The debate only intensified over the following years. Finally, in December 1833, Kaspar returned from a walk with a serious stab wound to his chest. He claimed he had gone to meet a stranger who promised to reveal information about his past. Instead, he said, the man suddenly stabbed him before disappearing. Kaspar died 3 days later at the age of 21. His death proved just as mysterious as his life. Some believed he had been murdered to protect a decades-old conspiracy. Others believe he had accidentally inflicted the fatal wound himself while attempting to stage another attack. No conclusive evidence has ever settled the question. In the years since Kaspar's death, historians and scientists have continued searching for answers. One of the most famous theories, that he was the lost prince of Baden, has largely been rejected following modern DNA testing. Samples believed to belong to Kaspar failed to show a maternal relationship with living descendants of the Baden royal family, making the royal conspiracy far less likely than many once believed. That still leaves the biggest question unanswered. If Kaspar wasn't a prince, then who was he? Some historians believe he was genuinely the victim of years of abuse and isolation, but may have exaggerated parts of his story as he struggled to explain a childhood he barely understood. Others believe he invented much of his remarkable tale, pointing to the questionable letters, his rapid intellectual development, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his injuries. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between those two extremes. Nearly 2 centuries after he first wandered into Nuremberg carrying 2 mysterious letters, no one has been able to explain where Kaspar Hauser really came from, who raised him, or what truly happened during the first 16 years of his life. Whether he was the victim of an unimaginable crime, an accomplished storyteller, or simply a young man whose past was more complicated than anyone realized, Kaspar Hauser remains one of history's most enduring unsolved mysteries. On a warm July day in 1947, life in Roswell, New Mexico was carrying on much as it always had. The town was home to just over 25,000 people, many of them connected in one way or another to the nearby Roswell Army Airfield. It was a military community, and for most residents, seeing servicemen around town was simply part of daily life. Among those residents was a man named Glenn Dennis. Dennis wasn't a pilot, a soldier, or a scientist. He worked at the Ballard Funeral Home as a licensed mortician. His job was about as ordinary as it gets. Families relied on him during their most difficult moments, and from time to time, he also provided services to the nearby military base. If someone at the base passed away, or if special funeral equipment was needed, Dennis was one of the people the Army would call. Nothing about his profession suggested that one day he would become one of the most talked about witnesses connected to the Roswell incident. His story wouldn't become public for decades, and even today, it remains one of the most debated accounts in UFO history. It began, according to Dennis, with a phone call. One day in early July 1947, someone from Roswell Army Airfield contacted the funeral home with a series of unusual questions. The caller wanted to know whether the funeral home had any small, child-sized, hermetically sealed caskets available. Dennis explained that they could obtain them if necessary. Then came another question. The caller asked about preserving bodies that had been exposed to the elements for an extended period of time. They wanted to know which chemicals could be used and how long a body might remain intact before burial. To Dennis, the questions didn't seem to fit any situation he had encountered before. Military accidents happen, aircraft crashed from time to time, but this wasn't the sort of conversation he expected after an ordinary accident. He later admitted that the request stayed with him because it simply didn't make sense. Why would the Army suddenly need very small sealed caskets? And why ask those particular questions about preserving remains? At the time, Dennis had no answers. A short while later, he made a routine trip to Roswell Army Airfield. Accounts differ slightly over the years about exactly why he was there. In some interviews, Dennis said he was delivering medical supplies to the base hospital. In others, he recalled stopping by in connection with funeral business. Whatever the reason, he claimed that something immediately felt different. Military police were stationed around parts of the hospital. Security appeared unusually tight. People seemed nervous. As Dennis walked through the area, he noticed an unpleasant odor drifting through one section of the building. Years later, he described it as unlike anything he had smelled before. Before he had much chance to look around, he said an officer confronted him and ordered him to leave immediately. Dennis later claimed the warning wasn't polite. He remembered being told, in no uncertain terms, that if he valued his life, he should leave the area and forget everything he had seen. Whether those exact words were spoken can no longer be verified, but Dennis insisted the encounter left a lasting impression. At the time, however, he still had no idea what had prompted such extraordinary security. That answer, he said, came from someone he already knew. Dennis claimed he had become friendly with a young Army nurse stationed at the base hospital. He later explained that they occasionally met for lunch and spoke whenever their schedules allowed. Not long after his visit to the hospital, the nurse allegedly asked to meet with him. According to Dennis, she appeared deeply shaken. She told him she had witnessed something inside the hospital unlike anything she had encountered during her medical training. She described 3 small bodies laid out for examination. The figures, she said, were roughly child-sized, but their proportions were different from any human anatomy she had ever seen. Their heads were unusually large. Their arms and legs were thin. Each hand reportedly had only 4 fingers. The skin was dark gray, and their eyes were much larger than those of a human being. Dennis said she tried to explain the anatomy by making rough sketches on paper. She reportedly drew the oversized heads, the unusual hands, and some of the internal organs that had puzzled the doctors conducting the examination. According to Dennis, she also described the atmosphere inside the examination room. The smell, she said, was overwhelming. One of the physicians had reportedly become physically ill during the procedure. It was an extraordinary story, but Dennis claimed he had no reason at the time to doubt her. He said he wasn't the sort of person given to fantasy, and she seemed genuinely disturbed by what she claimed to have witnessed. Looking back, Dennis would often say that her emotional state convinced him she believed every word she was telling him. Unfortunately, if the conversation really happened, almost nothing remains to support it today. Dennis said he never kept the sketches. No copies were made, no photographs were taken, the drawings simply disappeared. Then, according to Dennis, so did the nurse. Within a short time, he learned that she had been transferred away from Roswell. He later tried to find out where she had gone. Eventually, he claimed he was told she had died in an aircraft accident while serving overseas. For years, Dennis believed that explained why she was never heard from again. But as interest in Roswell grew during the late 1970s and 80s, researchers began looking for evidence that the nurse had ever existed. This is where the story becomes much more complicated. Dennis originally identified the nurse using the name Naomi Maria Self. Researchers searched military records. No nurse by that name could be found serving at Roswell Army Airfield during the summer of 1947. When investigators confronted Dennis with the missing records, he changed his explanation. He said Naomi Maria Self was not the nurse's real name. According to Dennis, he had deliberately used a false identity to protect her privacy. It was an understandable explanation, but it created a new problem. If the name wasn't genuine, then researchers had no reliable starting point for verifying any part of her story. Over the years, historians and UFO investigators searched personnel records, interviewed former military staff, and examined available documents. Despite those efforts, no one has been able to conclusively identify the mysterious nurse Dennis described. Her transfer could not be confirmed. Her reported death could not be confirmed. Even her existence remains uncertain. As more interviews with Dennis were published, another issue began to emerge. His story grew. Some details remained remarkably consistent. The strange phone call, the request for small caskets, the visit to the hospital, the nurse's account. Those elements appeared again and again. Other details, however, became more elaborate with time. Descriptions of the bodies became more detailed. Additional conversations appeared in later interviews. new memories surfaced years after earlier versions of the story. This isn't unusual with memories recalled decades after an event, especially one that has become famous around the world, but it does make it more difficult to separate original recollections from details that may have been influenced by years of interviews, books, documentaries, and repeated retellings. Interestingly, even some researchers who believe that something extraordinary happened at Roswell have expressed reservations about Dennis's testimony, not because they necessarily think he was lying, but because so much of his account depends upon a single witness whose identity has never been established. Without the nurse, much of the story cannot be independently verified. That leaves Glenn Dennis in an unusual position within Roswell history. He is neither one of its strongest witnesses nor one of its weakest. His profession made his story plausible enough to deserve attention. After all, if military personnel really needed advice about handling unusual remains, a local mortician would be exactly the sort of person they might contact. At the same time, the lack of documentation makes it impossible to know how much of the story reflects real events, how much may have been misunderstood, and how much, if any, changed through the passage of nearly 40 years before the account became public. Glenn Dennis maintained his story until the end of his life. He never claimed to possess alien bodies. He never produced photographs. He never offered physical evidence that could settle the debate. All he could offer was his memory of a few unusual days in the summer of 1947. Whether those memories describe one of the greatest secrets in modern history or simply an extraordinary story shaped by time is something each listener must decide for themselves. More than 75 years after the events at Roswell, the questions raised by Glenn Dennis remain unanswered, and perhaps that is why his account continues to be remembered, not because it provides certainty, but because it reminds us how difficult it can be to separate history, memory, and mystery when the evidence has long since disappeared. 3 very different mysteries, but each one leaves us with the same question: how much of the unknown is still waiting to be discovered? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode of Strange Encounters.